everyone. Thanks for coming. We'll get started here in a minute. Okay. So I just have 3 quick announcements before we get to the main events. First one is it's time to nominate officers for next year. We need to elect a president, vice president, treasurer, and a secretary. If you or someone if you would like to serve in one of those roles, or if you know someone that would and you'd like to nominate them, we'd like to have those nominations by October 1st. The chairman of that committee is our Vice President, Ann Schriefels, and Ann is over here. If you have any questions, her committee consists of Janet Rasmussen over here, Melissa Pashold, Melissa's in the back, and then Phil Hauser, orange shirt back here, and Tom Niebuhr. I think I saw, there's Tom. If you know one of these folks and you have questions, or if you want to approach a board member, please do. Again, they're due by October 1st. Next, we have a field trip coming up, Saturday, September 23rd. It's an evening field trip. It'll be at 6 p.m. We're going to Weston Nature Preserve. The field trip leader is Jan Turner. Jan's in the back here. If you have any questions or if you'd like to go, please talk with Jan. She'd be interested in setting up a carpool. And then the last thing is we will have a book sale this year. Those books, you'll be receiving the order form within the next few weeks, and we'll have those books in by our November meeting. So if you wanted to have them for Christmas gifts, they'll be available for you. Well, thank you. I'll turn it over to Kathy. Oh gosh, I forgot one more important thing. I'm sorry. There's 4 things. This weekend, Wild Ones is participating in Nature Trails Day. We'll be staffing our booth from 10 a.m. to noon. I will be there from 10 a.m. to noon. I like to have 2 people to help. We're going to be making butterfly clothespins with the kids, and of course, talking about native plants. So I'm going to pass this around. If you're available, please sign up. Thanks.
Okay, we're happy to have Trevor Edmonson with us tonight as he helps us learn more about the world of moths and how we might find them. Trevor lives in Kankakee, Illinois, and he's the site manager of Kankakee Sands Preserve for the Nature Conservancy of Indiana. He's been writing for the Kankakee Daily Journal since 2016. He also serves on the Midwest board of the Society of Ecological Restoration. He's a life member of the Illinois Native Plant Society. He also enjoys macro photography, hiking, insects, and much more. Did you know that there are actually more species of moths than butterflies? Butterflies actually, it's believed, evolved from moths, so the moths came first. I personally became more interested in moths when I read about a mothing, a nighttime outdoor event to discover the many types of moths that may inhabit a particular area. So in his program tonight, Fantastic Moths and How to Find Them, we'll be learning many things. He'll help us explore shapes, sizes, and colors of moths and why moths are important to local ecosystems. In his words, the diversity of moths is incredible. And once you open your eyes to their presence, you will notice them everywhere. So maybe in the next few days, months, we'll start doing that. So prepare to be dazzled as we learn more about the world of moths. Thank you for coming, Trevor.
All right, thank you. Yeah. Well, yeah, thanks for having me. Did drive down from Kankakee, but I am originally from Central Illinois or West Central, born in Galesburg and live in Knox County most of my life. So only recently moved up to Kankakee and been embracing that part of the state. All right. So yeah, Kathy covered most of what I was doing. Other than while I'm talking about insects and moths tonight and photography, my daily job is as site manager at Kankakee Sands. So, like many of you, I'm really interested in native plants and the restoration process. And I will touch on that a little bit just to start to give you some context of the project and where I'm coming from and where we do a lot of mothing and insect work um, at Kankakee Sands. So when I live in Kankakee, just nature doesn't care about state lines or county boundaries or anything like that. Um, so the project that I manage is Kankakee Sands in Indiana, but there is a Kankakee Sands, Illinois as well, one large macro site. Our site, however, connects Conrad Savannah Nature Preserve, Conrad Station Savannah Nature Preserve, Beaver Lake Nature Preserve, and Willow Slough Fish and Wildlife Area. These three are state owned, and then TNC owns all of this, this green and this orange here. The idea is that we've connected these landscapes together, right, to prevent fragmentation, to allow the connectivity for all the different species, which we think is paying off. Historically, this used to be Beaver Lake. The outline there shows it. Indiana's largest freshwater lake in Newton County. It was part of the Grand Kankakee Marsh, which was drained in the 1800s, probably at least 1 million acres from South Bend all the way to Momence, Illinois. You can also see a lot of oak savanna, oak barrens along the marsh here. So our project, our prairie restoration wetland is 8,400 acres that I get to manage. And so it's a beautiful place if you ever get a chance to come up there and just want to see, prairie, restorations at that kind of scale in the Midwest. And we support a lot of different species there. There's our project office, and you can kind of see the prairie surrounding it. That's where I get to sit on my desk and go outside and everything. We also have a herd of bison there, 110 bison. All from or genetically from Wind Cave National Park. So they are pretty wild bison. It's part of the conservation story of the prairie is reconnecting the grazing history to it. We think that type of disturbance at scale, when you can do it, I wouldn't do it at Western Prairie, but when you have a large restoration, it makes sense. We also, I see a lot of butterflies back there in your picture. This is the regal fritillary butterfly, which we're kind of that last stronghold for that butterfly in the Kankakee area, and in Indiana in particular. It's a state endangered in both Illinois and Indiana, and up for federal listing as well. It likes violets, especially some of the more conservative violet species. So if you want to plant some of those. Yeah. In general, Kankakee Sands, if you like plants, we have over 700 different native plant species at our site. Not many places can say we have over 1,100 different moth species we have actively identified and documented at our site, which I think is pretty exciting. Bees, 155 species, butterflies, 70 different species have been seen at our site throughout our restorations and the remnants adjacent to it. And if you like birding, we have 250 species on our bird list. A lot of large grassland birds, short-eared owls, and all kinds of different things throughout there. So if you're looking for a little nature getaway, a couple hours away, I think it's worth a trip. Yeah, and I think. And mentioned macro photography. That has kind of been something that has grown on me as I've tried to document the work that I do. I've been inspired by many different photographers that are able to, even the small plants, the seeds, have so many different details in there that just, you don't, if you take the time to look at things a little closer and document that, it's really interesting. And really for documenting moths and other insects, it's really, unless you're going to capture them and pin them, and even then you still need to take high quality photos to get the identify them. But I really just like going out in the field and trying to take a picture and only take that picture with me. So you'll see me out there doing that. Document a lot of things via iNaturalist, which I will show just as a tool later. Yeah. And so goals for my presentation here tonight are kind of to demolish those preconceived notions that the moths are just brown and boring, because I definitely used to think that, not used to think about moths at all. But I, like Kathy said, once you're exposed to the diversity of it, it really unlocks a new world. I think many of us are really interested in the plants, right? And interested in that structure of that habitat, but really the bulk of the diversity that I'm protecting at Kankakee Sands, if you just number by species, is insect diversity. And so once you get to know that, really connects you deeper with that landscape that you're protecting, more than just beyond the flowers, because everything's working together. It's layered on top of everything, right? So for a master naturalist or someone just interested in that, the deeper you go, the more you're going to find. And it's fascinating to understand all those relationships. And I don't understand all of them. We're learning every day. And, what I also like is that many of these things, you don't have to go to some exotic place to find them. They can come to you in your backyard, and you can sit in your lawn chair and wait for them to show up. You don't have to go to the most high quality natural area to see these things. I found so many species that I found in my backyard, which I have houses all around me, that I haven't seen elsewhere, right? Not very many people are looking for these types of insects. So every time you go out, you're likely to see something new or something that you haven't found before. And so, yeah, I invite you to just think with an open mind and think about how you might begin to investigate that locally in your backyard or your local preserve, or, as a group here. Yeah, John Himmelman, who's definitely one of my inspirations, wrote this book. You can look at it when you're done. Here's a couple. This is the second edition. I read the first edition, but he's updated it with some more modern stuff. Nighttime Jewels in Your Own Backyard. And this book definitely inspired me. But he says, when darkness sets in, we retreat to our well-lit homes to wait it out. It has been my experience that once a person discovers just a smattering of what can be found in that darkness, the setting sun becomes a prelude to an exciting part of the daily cycle. A prelude to discovery and, welcome to the night. I think, everybody knows about looking for owls or going out and listening for whippoorwills maybe, or those types of nighttime activities, fireflies perhaps. But, the diversity is much more beyond those single species. And when mothing, you can definitely pair mothing with many other activities. We've definitely done owling and mothing at the same time as a group, or firefly walks, and then we go back and do some mothing. So I think it could be a collaborative thing for nighttime programming. If you're stargazing, something like that. So I want to talk about some of the mothing basics. Tips for finding them, some of the equipment I use, and some of the resources to get started. My goal is to leave you here prepared if you want to start mothing, and to understand what that, I say mothing, but it's really what I'll show a little bit later. It's more about not just mothing. Mothing is the gateway to other things. When you put up your sheet, there's beetles, there's leaf hoppers, there's all kinds of different species. So it's really sheet lighting is what some folks might call it. And literally, you're just using a bed sheet and some sort of stand. This is my son in our backyard, where I've seen many interesting species. And we just do this random nights sometimes. And actually, he helped me get started because when he was born back in 2017, I had to stay up late a lot and couldn't get any sleep. And so my daytime hobbies were pretty shot. So while I was when it was my turn to be awake, I would go out and every half hour and check the sheet and then go back in with him. So I credit William here to helping me get started on this path as I look for a new nighttime hobby. So For Illinois, there's this great resource called Moth Photographers Group. It's one of a few that is really amazing and get people started. It is what it sounds like. A lot of people post photos of moths on there, and they're categorized by species. You can kind of go through. But Illinois, they've documented in Illinois 2,172 species the last time I looked. Okay. There are around 2,000 native plants in Illinois. Roughly, there might be more than that. But there's an awesome paper that says that I learned at this event that if you take the number of native plants in an area, whether it's your backyard or preserve, and you take that number times 1.4 and 1.6, that gives you a range of moth species that you could probably expect in a given area based on the native plant density. All right, it's not an exact number, but it probably gets you in the ballpark. So in Illinois, given that, there should be somewhere around 3,000 species of moths, which if we're just going by Moth Photographers Group, that means there's about 1,000 moths that should be expected to be seen that just haven't either been documented via that method, that website, or just haven't been seen at all. And so I think that's pretty cool. And so every time you go out in moth, whether it's here at Kankakee, Galesburg, my mom's backyard, wherever, there's a chance that that could be a county record. There's a chance that that could be a state record, right? Or something that is very strange to this area that no one's seen before. And that's exciting to me. And for perspective, I see a lot of butterfly pictures back there. I assume you guys all like butterflies, you know. There's around 150 different butterfly species that can be seen around here in Illinois. Of course, some of those are pretty rare and likely you're not going to see them, so it's probably less than that. That does include skippers. So really, though, the ratio is for every one butterfly species, there's probably about 20 moth species. And so when you think about diversity, of species that we're protecting, a species that we're conserving for. When you're planting all those native plants, you know, you're also planting those for moths, whether you know it or not, because a lot of those moth species are using those same plants, right? And so some places I've done sheet lighting, just to feel like I'm not telling you guys a lie here. The Kankakee River State Park, I've done that several times. The Morton Arboretum, the Dixon Waterfowl Refuge, Indian Ridge Marsh, and then several local areas in Kankakee, plus our Kankakee Sands Preserve, which I did not list up here. But I do credit the Peoria Academy of Sciences. Also, Frank Hitchell from that group got me started. I went to a sheet lighting program put on by him at the Dixon Waterfowl Refuge, and he really showed me, you know, what it's like to execute a sheet lighting program and just to capture some of that diversity. He's very good, and he's had well over 1,000 species just in his backyard in Peoria County. And I've been to his house, and he's really hardcore about it. But it takes people like that to inspire others and you know, to pass on that knowledge. And so here's iNaturalist. Have any of you guys used iNaturalist before? It's a great way not to only document your nature journey. It's an app. It's a desktop. You can get, you know, it's a very powerful citizen science, community science tool. It's a nonprofit organization now. It used to be partnered with I think University of California, but now it's its own entity. But the idea is that you can search on here wherever you're going, and you can look at observations that other people have made. And it's a good way to know what moths might be in your area, or what butterflies, or what plants, right, that people have seen documented. It's also a great way in the wintertime to practice ID, because people need help with identifications, and you can just, you know, scroll through pictures and say, oh, I know what that species is. I know, you know, in a cold January day when you'd rather be out in the spring or summer. And so these are the butterfly and moth observations from the state of Illinois. And so there's about 140,000 the last time I looked. The bulk of those, you know, it represents over 1,900 species. So about 1,700 species or so are moths, obviously. So you're going to get a good representation of, if you do, you search for your region, you can zoom in and out of what might be in your area, what you can expect, rather than worrying about 3,000 potential moth species, right? That's overwhelming for everybody. Trying to narrow it down and say, okay, this time of year, this month, this window, there's maybe 100 species that it could be. And iNaturalist is also great at helping you identify what species it might be based on the picture, using like a computer algorithm. And every time there's more pictures, it gets more and more accurate to at least get you to the genus or the family of that if you don't know the exact species. So good place to start. I usually start there and then go beyond. So what is a moth? I should say every picture of moths or insects I've taken in this presentation, and most all of them are from Illinois area. So, they might look crazy, but they're all mostly local here. So what is a moth? What makes it different? I think Kathy mentioned that, it is believed that butterflies are kind of a niche, that most moths are nocturnal, and butterflies have evolved to take up that daytime space, right? And they have a lot of similarities when you look at moths and butterflies, but there are some distinct differences. Butterflies, when you look at the best way is to look at their antenna. Butterflies are going to have like a club at the end or a hook, where moths are either just going to have like a thread-like antenna or a feather. It's going to be more like very feathery on the end. And I got some pictures of that. So that's one way you can look pretty closely. Obviously, moths are mostly at night, but not all. There are a lot of daytime flying moths. The daytime flying moths often, however, mimic other insects. They are mimicking wasps. They are mimicking beetles. They're mimicking bumblebees. You probably all have, or hummingbird clearwing moths, right? They're mimicking small birds or bumblebees. And so they are trying to camouflage themselves the best they can as other pollinators. But yet they are still visiting flowers. They're still out there. There's some that look like lightning bugs. Generally moths are much more hairy, especially and hairy is the wrong word. Butterflies and moths both have scales, right? You probably also looked at a butterfly scale. Moths have the same kind of scales. The moth scales generally look more hairy-like. They're altered a little bit, especially their body. Their body has a lot more of these elongated scales on it. Whereas butterflies mostly have more of a clean-shaven look on their abdomens and stuff. Generally butterflies have very colorful patterns, but I will say that several of the moth species that I'm going to show you are also very colorful, and it just depends what time of year, what they're trying to mimic. They're always trying to mimic something, and so it's like I said, it's very difficult to go out in the daytime and find a moth randomly. If you're know what species you're looking for, you know what the host plant is, you can kind of target that, but they're very good at camouflage because they're hiding during the day. They don't want to be found. And generally butterflies are like I said, the daytime they are more solar powered, right? The moths do not. They definitely like warmer, humid nights, but they're not interacting with the sun the same way a butterfly is, right? So club, filiform, pectinate moths, bipectinate. So I'll show you that. Here's the club of a butterfly. You can kind of see that up close, right? That's pretty clear. So just get a good look. Is it a club or is it a hook? Skippers usually have the hooks on them. Filiform. So this is that thread like I was talking about, just very simple, nothing at the end, kind of gets thinner as it goes on. Pectinate. So this is more like it's more like a comb, where it's got a hard edge and then these feathers that come down from it. So if you think of like a comb, and then bipectinate has that comb feature on both sides. That's more the true feather. And this is a chickweed geometer moth. I see these in my yard all the time. Very colorful. Could compete with any butterfly as far as color goes. So anyway, Really like that one. So when we talk about shapes of moths, there isn't a uniform shape. Again, they're trying to blend in with different things, do different things. There's a great, you can download this online just as a great starter kit to like, okay, I don't need to know the species. I'm just trying to figure out what family it's in. You can probably guess this might be a Luna moth, but there's bigger moths like that. And these are generally to scale. These ones kind of look like stealth fighters, these hawk moths. Underwings, they're kind of highlighting the colors here. Geometers, probably my favorite. They look the most like butterflies. And so if you see one that's kind of got that butterfly vibe to it, it's probably a geometer. And then you have all these other small, and here's the one that kind of looks like a wasp to me, this clear wing, borer moth. Plume moths look like just like this is much bigger than a plume moth actually is. It looks like a T. It's just one of the weirdest looking moths out there. But anyway, it just helps you kind of get into the body structure without trying to be overwhelmed by exactly what it is. And when it lands on the sheet, you can kind of guide yourself, and it's like a funnel, You're trying to narrow it down in your head when it hits the sheet about what it might be. And so why do I care about insects, and why should you right now? I think everybody in this room is probably sympathetic to that and understands. But insects are, great indicator species of high quality habitat. They're also a great indicator when there's not insects around, right? That things are not going great for them. They don't live very long. They're susceptible to big changes in the environment, disturbance, right? So if you have a lot of insects, you're doing good. If you don't have a lot of insects, there's probably something wrong. And so whether it's climate change, whether it's wildfires, whether it's invasive species, insecticides, pollution, concrete, all these things, they're all affecting insects. And I think, a native garden without insects is not really that exciting. And the plants would probably agree. Yeah. And so I think there's a lot of different papers about insect apocalypse, and I'm not going to go in there and say this is happening, this isn't happening, but there is definitely some concern across the globe, right, about large amounts of species, quantities of them declining. And part of it is, I like this quote, it says, we see 100 of something and we think we're fine, but what if there were 100,000 of those things two generations ago? Not many long-term insect studies have been done in many of our natural areas since they were disturbed, right? We're just kind of catching up now. And so we don't have historic context for a lot of these populations to understand where they're actually coming from, like maybe we do with birds, for example, where people were interested in doing bird surveys for, over 100 years, or historic plant records about where things used to be, right? There's not so much of that for moths or other insects, because it is kind of a specialty thing. I think we all know the story of the monarch, and just as a harbinger of other insects, and just the decline it's seen in its recent time. Doug Tarrin, who's at the Chicago Academy of Sciences, notes that they've seen in their butterfly surveys a 30% drop in butterflies since 2000. So that's one of the more active long-term butterfly monitoring programs in the state. In Germany, a massive decrease of abundance of insects by biomass. And the other thing is, and I see this a lot in the conservation field that I am in that we focus a lot on single species conservation. But yet, it's often those less charismatic species, right, that provide just as important, or the mass. I work with bison. That's a great example, right? Bison, people love bison. They understand bison. They understand the historical context of bison to the landscape, all that. That's easy to fundraise for. It's easy to talk about. But moth species, leaf hoppers, random American burying beetle, for example. That people are less excited about those, but maybe they're more when we think of how the trickle down of protection and importance to the overall weight of conservation. That's important for insect conservation. And so, especially insect conservation in general, we talk about the monarch being that iconic species. We're all about milkweed and stuff, and that's great. But there's a lot of other insects that are worse off than the monarch, right? That we're not even thinking about. And so, and that's not limited to moths that are just kind of blinking out over time, right? Because they don't have the resources. So, something to consider. For me, it's the regal fritillary is a great example. We put a lot of energy and thought into the regal fritillary through violets, and but we also try to monitor for other insects through our time and manage that if we can. Yeah. So benefits out of, when we're talking about moths, pollination. Very few people talk about moths as pollinators, but us in those daytime moths, a lot of our plants, a lot of our orchids are moth pollinated. You go at night, there's some great video and photos of moths pollinating rare orchids. They have some of those longer, with the longer flower structure require really long proboscis to go down there, and only some of those hawk moths, sphinx moths are the only ones that can pollinate those particular plants. But a lot of other, just a lot of other plants have evolved with moths. Yeah. I would say the food chain is the other thing I'd like to highlight here. I think Doug Ptolemy is mentioned back there a lot. His new book about oaks talks about this. I talk about the abundance of moths. Well, that also relates to the abundance of caterpillars, right? And caterpillars is a food source. If we're thinking about bird migration, they're leaving the rainforest, and they're leaving the Gulf Coast, these lush environments. Why? Because we have all these caterpillars up here when the forest kind of opens up and the leaves start to come on. All these springtime caterpillars are here, so you get the migrating warblers coming up, all the birds. And that mostly is due to the bulk of moth caterpillars that are in our trees and our oaks. I think oaks support like 400 different species of moths or something like that. He talks about that in his new book. But so if you just like moths because of the food that they provide to other species and to birds in particular, I think that's enough, right? They are critical. Without moths, that food chain kind of falls apart. And there's just so many unknowns. Like I said, we won't know until they're gone that this species was important for X, for this plant or that. We're not really sure, because a lot of the moth species that are even out there today, we don't even know the host plant. If you go through some of the more modern books, they like to list the host plant below each species. There's so many that we're just like, don't know, because no one's ever been able to track it or identify the caterpillar in time. You just basically have to raise the caterpillar when you find it on that host plant, and then figure out what moth it becomes before you can document it. And that's a long process that you got to be committed to. So why have moths as a hobby? Because I think interest leads to tracking, which leads to awareness, which leads to concern, which leads to then action, right? And I didn't make that. That was Chris Thomas. But I really think that's true with any hobby and interest, whether it's native plants or oak savannas or birds or whatever. If you're passionate about it and something sparks you to go a little deeper, and then you're going to be an advocate for those species in that system. So if there are so many moths, why can't I find them? Yeah, you probably aren't noticing them very often, but they are out there. And I said moths can blend in with about everything. You are mostly going to be indoors at night, so you're not going to see the bulk of them. And if you did see a day flying moth, you probably wouldn't know it was a moth unless you looked very close. And they are seasonal to a point. There are winter moths, like if it warms up to 50 degrees in December, I can find a moth probably. But there are fewer species, right, at that time. The bulk, April to September. If it's a warm October, we'll get some. But generally hot and humid, more diversity. So I can find a lot of moths in April if it's a warm night. If the moon isn't shining, you're not trying to compete with the natural light that's out there. Don't go mothing on a full moon night. That's going to be you're not going to get the best results because your light's got to be brighter than the moon, and that's hard. Yeah, and they like to hide in trees. So one thing I like to do is go if I'm out, at a restaurant or something. I'll look. They got the little lights outside. I'll look on there, and you'll be surprised what's hanging out. Or like a little wooden pavilion. If you're at the park, the trailhead entrance in the morning, and you go look underneath the rafters. Sometimes there are moths hanging out up there that you wouldn't expect because those are made out of wood. They're kind of like a tree, right? And I find a lot of interesting species just kind of in these random places that you just got to be more observant and take a couple steps around. Like here's a good one at Medewan. I've found several different moth species in these corners up in here. Not too far from my house. Here's another one that was sitting on mulch. This is a lunate zale moth. Look at that. You could step on that and not know it. And again, if that's a mulch path, but if that was just leaf litter in the woods, again, you're probably not gonna see that. So now is the point where I'm just showing you a bunch of pictures of moths for a little while. The Virginia creeper sphinx moth. Again, this is one where I've grown an appreciation for vines. I think, and whether it's Virginia creeper, wild grape, or even poison ivy, while they can be annoying in some habitat and some natural or some gardens, landscapes, they're incredible for harboring a lot of as a host plants for insects. Every time I read the field guide to moths or other insects, how many of those three species just keep coming up as host plants for various things? It's pretty crazy. Virginia creeper sphinx moth is one of those where if its wings are shut, it is hard to find. You notice it's very calm. This one was sitting kind of on a post, and I kind of knew what it was, but I was able to use my thumb to slowly peel it away, and you can kind of see that color underneath it. But that color is usually hidden. So a lot of moths might be gray or brown on the top, but if you were to just see that under part of their wing, that hind wing, you have a lot of color under there. Here's another great camouflaged one that was sitting in some leaf litter, and I don't even know how I found this one. But even just those little dots kind of in the dots, on the leaf itself. Again, I'm just amazed. Yes, this is a gray and brown moth, but I can appreciate the effort that it's gone to be camouflaged. Beautiful wood nymph moth. This one, you might guess, is a mimic of using bird poop. There is a whole cluster of species, some of them very rare, and some of them not so rare, like this one. There are two moths. There's another one that looks kind of like this one that has like lobes. See how this is this is just a flat line, but there's another one that's kind of got lobes that go in and out here that is a different species, but that's how you tell the two apart. But again, if this is just laying on a leaf or something, on your porch, but it is indeed a moth. This one might be one of my favorite. This is a crocus geometer moth. So a geometer, again, kind of looks like a butterfly. This one, there are two. There's a false crocus geometer, and there's this crocus geometer, and you can't tell, without doing a dissection, you can't actually tell the two species apart. So I'm just happy that I see it, and I just know that it's one of the two, and I move on. But I find it to be one of the more, if I had to get a tattoo of the moth, it'd probably be this one. I don't know. I see a couple of them a year. I know they're not rare necessarily, but it is, kind of uncommon for me to stumble upon one. Usually it's random, but this one was, I think this one was in Iroquois County at the Iroquois Conservation Area. If I remember right, I was walking along a trail there and just caught my eye. So anyway, it's a gorgeous moth. This is a more common one. These ones have big boom or bust cycles where you'll see just a million of these, or there's another one that's kind of related to it, a LeConte, where you just can't, you'll see dozens of these out in various places. If you're walking through the prairie, you'll flush them up. But there are several that kind of have this structure, and they just have different patterns. You can tell the different species apart by these different patterns on their wings, but they look kind of the same. They're black and white. They just have different splotches. Yeah, but still very, very different. This one I've only ever seen once. Owl-eyed bird dropping moth. Again, a bird dropping mimic, but there's an eye here and there's another eye over here. And I saw it in Perry Farm, in Bourbonnais, along the Kankakee River, and I've never seen it ever again. And I don't know anyone who else has seen it in our region. So it's one of those that you don't know how rare it is until you just never go years without finding it again. And you're like, man, I wish I would have, cherished that a little longer. Here's the other angle of it. So it's kind of got those owl eyes kind of looking at you, that mask on the back of it. But still chasing after that one. Hope to run into it again. It is a very gold, it's like this golden shades of gold and white, and very bizarre. The painted lichen moth, there's a couple that kind of have this sort of pattern, but I think they're either lightning bug or beetle, some sort of beetle mimic. But I will get these, at my garage. So I'll talk about equipment later, but I do set up sometimes in my backyard or my front yard or by my garage, and so these will just. I think that's where this cracked paint here is somewhere on my house. I know that. Said another. You wouldn't suspect this is not a traditional looking moth, This one you may have seen, very colorful. Again, kind of looks like a beetle. This moth can be found almost anywhere in the globe, maybe except for Antarctica, the Arctic regions. This one is in, like I said, if you look on its iNaturalist distribution, it is closest to, I don't know if you want to say an invasive species, but it's not really, as far as I know, hurting anything, but it is one that has come here, and but it's spread everywhere across the globe. So, it is a very colorful one. It stands out, that pattern, when you do see it at your light. But I bet I see this in my back. I mean, most urban areas, I think we could find this one. The small-eyed sphinx moth is one of those hawk moths. To me, this looks like a dragon, like on fire or something. I found this in my backyard. I see this most often at the Kankakee River State Park. There's a campground there that we've done sheet lighting. I've seen it in April. I've seen it in July. It has a pretty wide range of when it can show up. But again, very vibrant colors. It's one of the larger moths. It's got here's the same one. It's got a couple of these blue-eyed spots on the back. So if you were to pry open the wings even more than I did here, you would really see those eyes really pop out of there. But again, to me, it was one of the first hawk moths I ever saw, and I was just enchanted by it when it came, and couldn't believe that was just out there, flying in the dark. Curved-tooth geometer moth. To me, there's several geometers, especially geometers that like to mimic leaves, dead leaves. Something about the curved tooth, and maybe because I have bison, I think something like it's like a little bison skull up here or something. But I just really, as someone who likes leaves and walks in the woods a lot, I just appreciate what they're trying to do. I guess I don't know. There's several species that are just amazing to me. And when one of these flies in, you just can't believe that, that all that effort has went in, and you're lucky enough that it flew to your sheet. But there's a whole host of them that look kind of like that. This one is one of the more wild. This one I was mentioned, pavilions. I live near Limestone Township, just west of Kankakee, and there's a park there, and we have a lot of cherry trees in that park. And there's a couple wooden pavilions, old wooden pavilions, moss on the roof. Underneath the rafters, in certain times of the year, I can reliably find this moth just tucked in there in the corner. And I remember the first time I just like this isn't, this doesn't look real. It looks like a piece of carpet someone, might have stuffed up there. But yeah, the cherry scallop shell moth. I don't know what it's trying to mimic, but its host is cherry. And it, like I said, yeah, it's wild. And it's sort of a larger moth. But again, it's not trying to hide its colors just down here. It's the same pattern throughout, which I found pretty good. One of the larger moths that we find that also is one of those kind of leaf mimic, I think fall, but you can find these in the summer, is this imperial moth. It's got to be one of the larger, we have the Luna moths. This was at the Kankakee River State Park. We have several of those that will fly in. I found one of these at Walmart one time in the mulch, just hanging out on a pallet, which was weird. But again, my eyes were thinking, I don't know, I'm just like cursed now. Every time I look, I see moths, right? And so I'm like, wow, they just pop out. So that's what happened there. And anyway, this is a gorgeous moth if you ever were to find it. So the chinkapin leaf miner moth, this was in my backyard. And what I wanted to illustrate with this, I've only seen this moth a couple times ever, but this one was in my backyard, is that I've showed a lot of big moths, but most of the diversity of moths are very little. And so that's why macro photography is great, because you can see those details where I couldn't really see this moth with my naked eye very well. So I put for scale in my wedding ring here, this moth, so you can kind of see it. And then I took a picture of it, I got signed, and then I was like, I was looking at the back of my camera and I was like I thought it was a leaf hopper first, because we do get a lot of leaf hoppers, and there's a lot of interesting leaf hoppers out there, if you ever get into that line of work. But anyway, I looked at the back of my camera and and it's like some sort of piece of jewelry or something, shimmering, with this wild scales, like hair-like scales, but this gold and blue pattern. I'd never seen anything like that before. And like I said, it was so small that, I said without the macro camera, I would not have been able to appreciate that. And so now every time I go on a shoot, I'm investigating every little thing, because I just never know what I'm going to see, right? And so that's part of the excitement, is to look real close and get those extra details, in case you don't want to miss something like this. Y'all probably know, I've probably seen these, hummingbird clearwing moths. There are several different species that kind of resemble this. Often, this is on a thistle, but a lot of times I see them, in evening at dusk. But if you're out in a prairie, like a full blooming prairie, I don't think they're as particular, and they will be out, just around. I've seen them in the middle of the day at our preserve, on some Monarda and stuff going. Yeah, it often looks like a bumblebee just flew past you or something, but yeah. So this one I'll admit wasn't local. I went to this event called Mothapalooza. Yeah, it was in Ohio. The Ohio Lepidoptera Society put it on, and it was 200 people, and they had 10 sheets set up in a state park, and you could caravan, take a bus, or you could drive yourself to all 10 sheets. And it was like from 8 p.m. to like 2 a.m. And, you slept during the day and you did moth at night, basically. And it was awesome. And so every sheet had something different on it. And this was one of the moths that I had never seen, a black-waved flannel moth, which is just like the Easter bunny or something, And so there are several flannel moths, and they have different patterns on them, but this one is pretty unique. Here's one of the plume moths I was talking about earlier. It looks like a T. This is definitely way blown up. They're very small, but I'm certain you can find some of them around here. There are several species. Some of them are a little bit larger, some of them are smaller. But again, intricate in their patterns and design, but wildly different from any of the other body types of moths I've showed you so far. Yeah, this one, the Harris three-spot moth, is probably my favorite moth. The crocus geometer I mentioned earlier is right up there, but this one might be a little too wild for a tattoo, but it is even more rare. I think I've seen it 3 times in my life, once at Morton Arboretum, once at Kankakee Sands, and then once in Ohio. And it's just always been exhilarating to see it. Its caterpillar has a really strange life cycle where it sheds its skin and like keeps the head of the previous caterpillar version with it. And so it looks like this, like, Mad Max character or something, but very frightening. But it turns into this, and when you see it in person, it's just I don't know how to explain it. It's just something bizarre, but also just the rarity. I remember after reading this book, I friended John Himmelman on Facebook and just interacted with him a little bit. And when I posted that, he commented, he's like, he hadn't seen that. He's in Connecticut. He hadn't seen that in like 3 or 4 years where he'd at, and he's mothing like regularly. And so that's what I knew. It was pretty rare. So rosy maple moth. Yeah, this is cotton candy moth, whatever you want to. It is, they can occur. I think they're more, from my area, we have seen them, we've documented them before at Kankakee Sands, but they're more south. So you guys might have more luck here than me. I saw them in Ohio. There was a ton of them. We were in southern Ohio though. So I think southern Illinois, they do come up. But again, rosy maple, gorgeous, like stunning, right? Just obnoxious color pattern there. Yeah, common spragular moth. I don't know, something tiger-like with that one I like. Giant leopard moth, I see these a lot. They hang out by lights. So if you have, lights that stay on at night, I don't recommend that. Light pollution hurts moths, but if you're just going to look for moths and you happen to be a park that has a light, it's a good thing to look in the morning if you're trying to see what local moths are having. This one is often at the Kankakee River State Park. They have like a little bathroom facility for campers. And this one's always there, it seems like. I think it's been a lot of hurricanes. We're at hurricane season right now. This is a black witch moth. This is one of the largest, if not the largest moth in North America. Hard to really show it on the picture, but I mean, it's bigger than my hand. And they're a tropical moth. However, a few times a year, they get blown up here because there's a tropical storm that pushes, birds to have the same problem. You'll get a random bird from the Gulf that's up here. People are going to see it because it's rare, right? Moths are the same way. A moth isn't going to stand a chance to a hurricane that's pushed, the winds from Mississippi up the valley here, and oftentimes they land in our region. And so black witch moth is one of those, and it's hard to ignore because it's so large. I've been lucky to see a few of them. This one was under a bridge at the Kankakee River State Park, just hanging out. A friend of mine, again, you talk about moths, people think of you, texted me and said, "Hey, there's this large moth underneath the bridge. You should come." And I brought my stepladder, and we kind of looked up in there, and there it was. So really happy about that. So what do you need to find moths? This is Frank, Peoria Academy of Sciences, I mentioned. This was his setup, and I have replicated most of his setup. Moths are strongly attracted to ultraviolet light and blue radiation. So not every light bulb is created the same, right? You can use, I think first night I was so excited, I stole a light bulb from my bathroom and just went outside, but those are standard bulbs. They're not, they're fine, but they're not going to get you the spectrum to bring in a bunch of stuff. Yeah, I mentioned that, from the kitchen to the bathroom, and a bed sheet. But the important upgrade was I went, and you can go to your hardware store, a party store, what I'm sure with the college here, there's plenty of party stores around. Just get a black light. a black light's a great way to go, a catch-all. A lot of insects are attracted to black light, right? And you can find a bulb pretty cheap, just in a standard one that goes into normal socket with your garage light. I have like a little, I have this little thing that I bought specifically. This was from an insect supply store, mounted on a tripod, but that accepts any bulb. There's several insect supply websites that kind of you can find things like that, but you don't have to buy from them. I have a mercury vapor bulb, which if you ever go to like, it's more of an industrial light. They're harder and harder to find. I think most people are going away from mercury vapor, but it does have the wide spectrum that attracts a lot of insects in there. So I'm glad the industry and stuff is moving away from them, because light pollution attracts a lot of insects, but it has made it harder for us to find them. So it doesn't really, this is self-ballasted, so it can go into this light, the ballast. There's a thing called a ballast. It's kind of built into the light bulb. You can get non-ballasted light bulbs, but then you have to buy the extra kit, kind of ballast box separate from it. Which is an expensive deal. Clear frosted, this is a clear one. You can get frosted ones. I don't think it. I mean, purists will say you should get the clear one, so there's nothing interrupting those wavelengths. But I think you can still get a lot of insects. Whether it's easier to find the frosted ones. Say that. So yeah, this is we have a lot of fun. This is at the Kankakee River State Park. My sheet. This is a quilt rack that I bought. People display quilts, they need a rack for it. I found that online and it worked out perfectly. I put little sandbags down here to weigh it down, and then I clip my sheet to it. Works out great. And then a normal tripod that I hang a light off, and no big deal. There are other ways to do it. This was something I bought. I haven't been too big of a fan of this, but there are other ones that I haven't tried yet. But basically the idea is that you can leave this overnight and attach it to a car battery and just leave it at night. And then you put egg cartons in here, and the insects, they'll fall through a funnel underneath the light, and they can't get back up through. They'll hide underneath those egg cartons. So if you go in the morning, you can open up the top of it and kind of survey your catch and then let them go. This is big in Europe. A lot of people are doing moth surveys in their gardens, and so this is the way they do it. They'll set it out at night, check it in the morning, and take pictures. And moths are less active in the early morning because it's colder and there's dew or whatever, and so it's easier to handle them. But you still got to be careful. It's got a photo sensor on it so that it doesn't actually turn on until the sun sets, and then it goes off in the morning. You can kind of create your own with a black light, or however. This is just a laundry basket with this one's called a heath trap, I believe, where it's got plexiglass that kind of has a gap in the middle, and they fall into that. Bucket trap, kind of the same idea. Funnel, egg cartons under there, a light. They can. That's a cheap way to do it. Same idea. Another one. Same idea. But yeah, black light's easy to find. I think I went to Lowe's this day and just took some pictures of a couple options that would work for anybody. You don't have to. You can buy a clamp light. You can buy one of these. This has a nice. If you can buy these, often they have an extension cord. Like a shop light that's already built in. You can hang these in a tree. You can hang them. You can mount them anywhere. Pretty easy to do. But maybe your garage light already has something like this on it, right? Or your porch light or something. I have something like this. Whenever I want to do moth, I just unscrew my regular light bulb and put in a black light and walk away and check it every 30 minutes or see what's landed on the wall next to it. And that works out good. Don't have a lot of investment in that at all, except for the light bulb and the time. Sugar baiting is another way to do it without any lights. Moths, especially early in the season, they like, if you think about overwintering, there's a lot of fermentation going on, rotten fruits and stuff. There's that sugar. A lot of insects are craving that, right? It's kind of like there's not a lot of nectar available, right? So they're they're after other things. So you can either do this in combination with lights. A lot of people do that. We'll go paint this on trees away from the lights because some moths will prefer this over the light. Or you can just do this in your backyard or whatever. And it's what I do is I get some bananas, some molasses, maybe you want something like maybe with a little alcohol, like some old beer or some wine or something, and you kind of mash it up into like a paste, and you kind of let it ferment I sit it out on the porch in the sun, kind of let it get a little gross, right? But it needs to be paste-like so you can paint it on a tree. And, rotten fruit's great for that. Anything you got, brown sugar, something sugary. And anyway, and then I go out and paint it, and then moths will fly into that. And then you can go check that. So we make these little trails out in the woods. Resources, I mentioned iNaturalist. I highly recommend that just to discover what you have in your area already and give yourself a starting point, because it's overwhelming when you think about that many moths. But it can help you get in the ballpark, and then at least you can log them on there and someone else can help you identify it if you don't know. Or maybe you'll learn a year from now what it is, but it'll still be there. You can come back to it. Bug Guide is the other great one besides Moth Photographers Group. Bug Guide is great for any insects, but it allows you to, there's usually keys on how to identify one species from another. There's a lot of photos on there of the same, that you can go through. So I kind of bounce it between all three of these, whichever one you're most comfortable with. Bug Guide is probably the most scientific, rigorous. Moth Photographers Group has a lot more on one page to compare to, I think, like the way they're organized allows you to view a lot side by side, a little bit easier to compare different species of similar. And then iNaturalist just gives you that more local funnel, which I think is important. And then there's just a ton of Facebook groups as well that are either moth specific, sheet lighting specific, that you can tap into and post a picture, get some advice, narrow something down. And there are more moth books out than when I started. I cannot recommend this enough. I think the way this is written is very accessible. It's not meant to be a scientific. It tells you a lot about moths, but it also just tells you a lot about how John got into moths and just great stories. And hopefully, kind of like my presentation here, will just motivate you in an easy way to get involved and through his story. But then I do have that round table back there, which has a bunch of other field guides and there is the Peterson's Guide, the Moths of Northeastern North America, which is great. But again, there's maybe 600 species in that book. And so you're not going to get all of them through one book, considering how many species there are. But it is a good starting spot, right? It can help you, again, narrow it down. Moth Photographers Group, Bug Guide, iNaturalist. And yeah, moths are not alone on the sheet. There's a book about beetles back there, but I mean, again, I take a lot of pictures of things that aren't moths because they just happen to come in. They're attracted to light, or they are predators of things that are on the light, or they're just there randomly. Leaf hoppers, lots of beetles, tree hoppers, wasps. Oh man, the amount of diversity of wasps that I see, because wasps are often, trying to. They're predators of some other insects, so they're going to be around, and it's amazing to see the diversity that you'll see. And this is one of my favorite, a hologram moth as well. This was up at the Dixon Waterfowl Refuge, and only time I've ever seen that one as well. The way it shimmers gives it its name, but yeah. So yeah, I think that's it.
Okay, we'll bring the microphone around if people have questions. Anyone have a question?
So if you put up a sheet, how long do you leave it up with the light on it before? Do you leave it up all night and go look, or just a couple hours? Or
it depends on how good your nap was that day, I suppose. But I try to get it up at sunset, and as long it depends on what I got to do that next day, right? Some moths and how warm it's going to be into the night. If it's after midnight, if it's going to get down to the 50s, I'll pack it up. because usually the diversity goes down as it cools. But on a hot, humid night, you'll get waves coming in at different times. As there's this idea that different species move at different times of night. They're not all moving at the same time, So a lot of hardcore mothers will. Almost everyone that I can think of that I've moth with owns a van, and they sleep in the van. Now, I got kids at home, I'm not doing that, but I can think of Frank and several of the other hardcore ones. They all do that. So they will.
I'm just going to do it in my backyard.
Yeah,
so.
yeah. So it's up to you. I go in, I'll set it up. I'll be watching a Netflix show in between episodes. I'll go out and check it, right? Something like that. Or I'll just sit out there with some friends and talk about other stuff. And just as things come in, we'll document them. But I usually try to go for a few hours to get the most of it after sunset. Yeah.
I have a question about caterpillars. Do you
Yeah.
have any favorite caterpillars, and do they match with the coolest moths or not?
Oh, I would say the Harris 3-spot is probably my favorite. But caterpillars it's their own world because they are often very hard to identify themselves, and they look so different than the adult moths that it's hard to be a moth expert and a caterpillar expert at the same time, because you got to learn two different ways of identifying things to do that. And but I mean, we do spend a lot of time. One thing, there are some caterpillars that glow in the dark. So I have this black light here, and you can take this out at night and you can shine it on leaves. And some of the moth caterpillars will glow iridescent at night if you use one of these. And so that's another fun way to go out and identify if you have certain species or not, especially if you know the host plant that you're looking for. Well, not the host plant, the caterpillars themselves. The Virginia creeper one does some of those big kind of like tomato hornworm, like you think of the hawk. So if you have tomato plants, you probably have seen those big hornworm. Those are all moths, and almost all of there's different species that look like that. But almost all of those, I don't even know if I should tell you this, but they all glow in the dark. So I guarantee if you go out and you have tomato plants, you you probably will find a few of those caterpillars, whether you want to or not. So the joke is that you always grow a couple extra tomato plants for the moth, but yeah.
Do they migrate at all, or do they just stay in the region where they're?
Generally not on purpose. Like I said, I mentioned their lifespans are so short. Like, we think about the monarch or something, but even the monarch itself, it's only that one generation that's long lived. But yeah, it's only by mistake. Like I said, those Gulf ones that get pushed up by the storm, that's not a strategic migration. It just happens. Yeah. Gently, of course, but so what I do, once they get to the sheet, they're pretty subdued because they're kind of like confused a little bit by that light. So often what a lot of photographers will do is they'll have leaves or sticks or something, and you can coax them pretty easily onto one of those things and kind of place them in a great photo position kind of thing. You can kind of create your own little background and backdrop. So I do that. I'll just have a couple sticks and I will slowly coax them on. Not all of them are that cooperative, of course, but generally they just like to hang on to something. So if you can just like get underneath their front, I wouldn't pick them up. Their scales and wings are very fragile, so I wouldn't do that. But if you can get them to get their paws on you, they'll go. Yeah.
I have a question. You mentioned 3 types of vines that moths like. I think the first one was Virginia creeper, and I didn't catch the second 2.
Yeah, so obviously there's a lot of different native plants that are hosts, right? But I find my comment was that it's Virginia creeper, it's wild grape or riverbank grape in my area, and poison ivy. That the more I read about, there's just such a wide variety of insects that rely on those native species and they're just often, I feel like, either in restoration or in garden settings, just kind of vilified plants because and sometimes they should be, they're just aggressive, right? But, nature has balance, and a lot of the species are supported by those three. Yeah.
Any more questions?
Over here.
Yeah, can you talk a little more about the danger of light pollution from moss?
Oh, sure. Well, so when I do sheet lighting, I never do it twice in the same area, right? Noting that moths and most insects have very short life cycles. So one night out of their life, the I've interrupted is a big proportion, right, of their chances of reproduction or survival. And if you do it more than once, the birds and the bats start to figure out what you're doing also, and they'll go there. Which is another reason I don't go all night. I will shake the sheet out and disperse them while they still have time to fly. But yeah, if you think about moths, there's theories on how moths navigate, throughout the night. Some will say the moon, but certainly light confuses them, extra light. And when we're shining my light, or their path gets interrupted. So if you can think about how many people have their garage light on every night, how many street lights there are, right? If you were to, like there's all these dark sky initiatives, right? They are attracted to those wavelengths, and the more of that light that's out there, the less likely they are to go out their natural process of reproduction. And anytime you go to a park, or you'll see all the bugs flying around up there, right? They're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. They're distracted. So I recommend that I'm all for security, safety. If you can switch to a motion detect light, that's the best way to go if you need a light, rather than just leave it on all the time. And then deciding which light bulb you want to use. Mercury vapor is a very strong light. Maybe going down to something like an LED, or they even make these. Some places are more progressive than others with streetlights, where they make these brackets or these kind of shields on lights that point the light just down or to one, so it doesn't shine behind it. Like there's very new ways of designing lights so that you're focusing the light on where it needs to be, but not broadcasting it everywhere. And so if we could all adopt those types of practices, it'd be a lot better. But especially around our natural areas where we know insects are important for pollination and other life cycle needs. Yeah.
Do you have to have a special camera to take, like when you're using your sheet, do you have to have a special flash to get a
So
picture?
that's a good question. And yes, I do. I have because when you're taking a macro, so I have a macro lens, which allows me to get really close. So I couldn't take your picture very well because you're too far away, but I could take the details of this microphone really easily. But in a standard flash, it goes out over top, right? A longer distance. So I probably have it at the very beginning up here. Well, Frank might, she's got one here, a ring flash that mounts on the front of her lens here. And so that puts all the light right in the front of your lens. And so mine is a little different. It angles the light from the side or the top. It was right at the beginning where I had it. I want you to see it. There it is. So this is one I've used. So these arms are adjustable. So depending on how far away I am for something, I can change the flash. If I want it, if the shadow is over here, I can put it underneath, or whatever. I can do different things with it, but it allows me to put the light really close to the front of the lens where a normal flash could not. Now, you don't need that, but for macro photography in general, if you're going to invest in something that's going to change the quality of your photos, the lighting and flash and diffusing of that light is, allows you to level up quite a bit. But you could take your cell phone and like a headlamp or a flashlight or something and just shine it, to get that, because it is kind of a weird, you're on the sheet, what time, there's a big light behind you. It's weird lighting. So anywhere you can balance that out and diffuse it in some way prevents that harsh light. But yeah, a lot of thinking goes into the flash, and the camera setup. Yeah.
Anybody else? Okay, Trevor brought a nice collection of books with him, and they're back on the round table at the back of the sanctuary here. We have refreshments tonight, so thank you for coming out, and I hope he's gotten you excited about moths. So thanks, Trevor. This was
Yep,
great.
no problem.